Today, on this episode of Going Deeper, we are going to be talking about the Manslayer and the original Avenger, which is not Captain America. I am your host, Kyle McCaskill.
I'm Becky Clark.
I'm Marie Burns.
So join us as we go deeper.
Okay, so we're doing 20 and 21 this week.
Yes.
And I read it.
20 and 21, yes.
Cities of Refuge is kind of fascinating.
Yes, it is actually quite fascinating. I jumped down a rabbit hole last night doing some extra readings. And that's when I texted you and was like, we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about today.
I think your words were buckle up.
I wanted to say buckle up, Buttercup, but I didn't feel like that was going to come across quite right on a text. It doesn't sound quite the same as like saying it.
Yeah.
You know? Buckle up, Buttercup.
All right. Well, anyway. I'm all buckled. What's up?
Yeah. Okay. So this week we're talking about we're giving the rest of the land. Mm-hmm. So we did that whole big thing last week where we gave the portions to the tribes. Now there's a little bit of business left, which is the cities of refuge and the cities to the Levites, which the Levites are not given inheritance or title to that land. They're just given kind of access to settle in those places because they're not supposed to own land. So, and the cities of refuge, both of these things in chapter 20 and 21 were dictated long before they got to the land. We will read, or we can talk about there's kind of a place in Exodus. There's some places in Numbers. There's some places in Deuteronomy where this is kind of said, this is what you need to do. This is referencing cities of refuge and referencing the giving of the land to the Levites, and actually how many pieces of land. So when it breaks it up in chapter 21,
I saw a lot of numbers.
It feels very boring, like the other chapters of the giving of the land. It's not boundaries so much; it's just these listing of towns within which tribes. And I don't know why, but every time it lists it, it says they're given the city and the pasture land. They're given the city and the pasture land. Such interesting repetition because they were required to have the city and the pasture land. So the fact that the author repeats it every time is a little bit tedious.
Well, I remember you and I talking about with Levites get no land, they had to have gotten something before we really got into this because sacrifices. Right. They had to atone for their own things before they could take care of anybody else. So we knew they had to have their own animals. Yeah. So how did they care for them? And so it makes sense to me.
Yeah. But it's just really tedious. Chapter 21 would be a lot shorter if it was just these are the cities, and then these are the cities in this tribe, and these are the cities in this tribe. But it's like this is the city, and they got the city and the pasture land, and then this city and this and the pasture land, and this city and the pasture land, and this city and the like.
We need the abridged version.
Got it. They always get the pasture land.
Right.
So there are some interesting things about chapter 21, but let's talk about chapter 20 because it's really got, both of you stopped on some things in chapter 20 that were like scratching my head and wondering about.
I drew some interesting cultural parallels to some things in chapter 20. Okay. But I'm curious to know to hear how you flesh those out.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things that I think is really important about talking about cities of refuge before we get into the Manslayer or Slayer and the Avenger of Blood, which is just, what? It's so cool to talk about, I guess. One of the things that we really need to talk about is some kind of going back to some degree of a Leviticus conversation.
Okay.
And a law conversation of the people of God and how God determines his justice for the people and how he has created this kind of lawful nation that is different from everyone else. So the cities of refuge have to do with asylum for someone who has accidentally killed someone else. And it within Scripture before Joshua, there's some very outlined and definitive things to determine if that person who is the slayer, manslayer, slayer, has actually murdered with premeditated intent or murdered accidentally.
Okay.
And the city of refuge is the place that they seek asylum before a trial is had.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before guilt is determined. And it really goes back to a lot of what God determined early in when he gave the law of how do we see each other? What's the value of human life? How I see the value of human life is as Yahweh, the creator of all, and then how you as my people should see the value of life. And what happens when life is taken among my people. So one of the things that was mentioned in one of the commentaries that I read was really this whole idea of city of refuge goes back to you have to start in Genesis chapter 9. And Genesis chapter 9 says that in Genesis chapter 9 verse 5, I'll start there. I will surely demand your blood for a human life. For every living thing, I will demand it. From humans, from a man for his brother, I will demand something for a human life. Whoever sheds human blood by a human, his blood will be shed. For in the divine image, God made human beings.
Is that after Noah, after they've come out of the ark?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I remember this from studying Leviticus.
Yes.
Because we were talking about what's the big deal about blood. And I remember my research took me to that point.
Yeah, so the idea that God goes back to often is about how blood pollutes creation.
Yeah.
So even when you talk about sacrifice of animals, how you deal with the blood of the sacrificed animal is a very important thing. You can't shed blood willy-nilly. It can't go wherever. It has to be disposed of in a very certain way because blood pollutes. Because God and the people of God, the way that God kind of conveys it to the people is that the life is in the blood.
Yeah.
Right.
The life is in the blood of the animal that's sacrificed. The life is in the blood of the person. And on top of that, for us, we are created in the image of God. So not only do we have life within us, but we have the image of God stamped upon us. So there's kind of this almost double for us.
Yeah.
So when you understand that, and then we get into a conversation of what happens when a life is taken, then there are certain things that the people of God are asked to do in regard to that. And God has dictated to the people while they were still in the wilderness that when you get to the land, you are going to set up these 6 cities of refuge. And 3 on the east side, which we know the half tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben are on the left, on the east side, and the rest of our tribes are on the right side. So 3 on the right side. Scripture dictates that from God that they need to be placed where if I am someone who needs to flee to the city of refuge, I need to be able to get there in a day or less. So they are intentionally put wherever you are within the tribes, you can get to a city refuge in a day or less.
Okay.
That's very important because the Avenger of blood should be coming after you.
Right.
And you need to get to the city of refuge before they do.
Quickly.
Because if they catch you before you get there...
Because if they catch you before you get there, they can avenge the death.
The death.
And they are right to do so.
Yeah.
No matter what
Yeah.
happened. I guess we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves here at this point.
that's-
It's okay. I mean, we're going to go back to it. So that is what the city of refuge is. And it is every city of refuge is also a Levitical holding.
Okay.
Because you have to have the priest there.
Yes.
Right.
The priests were the ones who were continuing to speak to the people of who God was, and the ones who are continuing to remind the people and of the law and the things that they are supposed to be doing. So, in essence, not that the priest, and this is kind of a difference that does not transpire yet in Joshua, but will eventually. The priests are not the law dictators in the sense of like, they are not the judges. Mm-hmm. But God will set people who will be the leaders, elders, or judges, who will be the ones who will determine what the sentence is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially. Yeah. But you have to be in Levitical city with the priest, because towards the end of the chapter, we'll talk about why.
Okay.
Because that's important. Okay. So the scripture tells us that you need to appoint these places. Mm-hmm. The place that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowing may flee there. Okay, well, so here's the question then. How does one determine if it was not done premeditated?
I have no idea. The notes that I have in this translation are telling me that it's kind of like it's a place to go and they will eventually stand trial.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then if he's found innocent, like if it is accidental, then the person can remain in the city of refuge until the high priest dies or whatever statute.
Must remain in the city of refuge.
Must remain,
yes.
right.
Cannot leave.
Right.
So, yes, go ahead, sorry.
But then if they're found guilty, then there's due punishment.
Yeah, so there was some debate in some of the commentaries that I read about where the trial is. Is the trial in the city of refuge? Is the trial right outside the gates of the city of refuge? Or is the trial back in the clan area of where the death happened? And nobody can quite, it just seems like everybody's a little bit confused about where exactly.
Right.
Most people seem to kind of lean towards the trial happens outside the gates of the refuge city. But two or three people I read said they take them back to the clan that they were from or fled from, and if they're found to be innocent, they then have to go back to the city of refuge. If you are found innocent, you have to stay in the city of refuge until the high priest dies, and we'll talk. Yeah. Hold off on asking me why, because we'll get to it.
I just thought it was very interesting that it used the term congregation until he stands before the congregation for judgment, and until the death of one who is high priest in those days.
Yeah, so this is the thing that may not have quite happened yet. So we're setting up the city of refuge, and just as God had determined certain things that would happen in the promised land, and we're taking some of those things, this seems to be one of the things that's not quite done yet.
Okay.
Even when we take the land. So what is the congregation was still somewhat like, is the congregation the whole town of the city of refuge? Or if you consider that they go back to the home clan, is the congregation the people of that clan? Or is the congregation the set of elders that have been chosen for the city of refuge to be able to determine things like this?
Yeah. According to just a real simple definition of the word that's used there, it really just means a gathering. And it's not specific.
Yeah.
And so I can see why there would be a lot of confusion there.
Well, and one other place said that really one of the things that transpires is by the time you get to Judges, the judges that were chosen by God are part of what preside over the trial. So you could kind of assume that even though they're setting up the city of refuge here, you can see in the next book of Judges that God puts people in place that would be the congregation, so to speak. that determine this, because it's quite important.
Right,
it's a big deal.
I think it's interesting. I'm going to take a little aside right here, because in all of this, we've been talking, and we went through Leviticus a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we, at the end of that book, it's talking about how we would move into the cities and everything. And now we're talking here. It's another instance of we're laying the groundwork for how things are to be done. And it's this continual notion that God is not a reactionary God. And I think that, to me, that's a very comforting fact, that in all of this, God is looking ahead for us, and he's trying to set up the systems for us to interact with each other and him in the best way possible. And I don't know. We tend to be very reactionary in this day and age, and God is very much not that. And that gives me a lot of, just thinking about this in this moment here, there's a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, so one of the references that I had was from Exodus 21, and I don't think in this part of Exodus, like this, right before that in chapter 19, they're at Mount Sinai. So they're like early into their time in the wilderness. They don't even know at this point they're going to be there 40 years. And one of the instructions is about hitting and killing someone. So this is way before we get to Joshua. You see that God has thought through a lot of things way ahead of time, because he knows humanity and that these are going to be issues. Even though he outlines that we shouldn't murder, he has to define even more clearly what he means by that. What that really means for us and how we deal with it. So in Exodus 21, starting in verse 12, it says, anyone who hits and kills someone should be put to death. If the killing wasn't on purpose, but an accident allowed by God, we're going to need more time to study that. Then I will designate a place to which the killer can run away, which becomes the city of refuge. It's just not named yet here. But if someone plots and kills another person on purpose, you should remove the killer from my altar and put him to death. And then it goes on to also talk about, like, if you hit your parent, or if you kidnap a person, or all that kind of stuff, slave owners, all this, like, he's starting to put those things in place. Then we get to, no, that's for something else. Then we get to somewhere in Numbers 25, 35, where it talks about the cities and the pastures of Levites, and it talks about...
I was just looking at it, verse 12.
Okay, so it really starts a little bit earlier than that. But yes, the cities will be for you a place of refuge from the close relative of the dead. When that close relative of the dead is what we know as the Avenger of blood.
Right.
Which Doug told us yesterday, which it's like chills. The Avenger, that word Avenger that is used in Scripture, is the same word as Hebrew word for kinsman redeemer, or kinsman. And that is the word that is used in the story of Ruth, where Boaz comes in and becomes the kinsman redeemer to restore Naomi's family. He marries Ruth, all this kind of beautiful, beautiful things. That's what Jesus is. One of the responsibility of the kinsman redeemer is to deal with the loss of life within their family, to avenge, and really they use the word to redeem or restore what was lost, what was shed. And the issue with blood, because blood is a pollutant essentially, is that blood has to be redeemed. So the loss of life, the loss of blood, that's why it's called the Avenger of blood, must redeem the situation in some way. So that means, it apparently through Scripture always means a loss of life for someone else. That's the only way that it can be avenged. Interestingly, if I am the avenger of blood for my family, and you premeditatedly kill someone,
Right.
it is my right to then redeem their loss by taking your life.
Yeah.
If you are found to be innocent of, you didn't do it on purpose, you have to spend the rest of your life in the city of refuge. But there is still a need for redemption of another life. Do you know whose life that is? The high priest's.
Okay.
Okay, wait. Say that again.
Okay. I want you to hear this because I want you to get it. There always has to be redemption and restoration for the death of one, the shedding of blood. Okay? So as the avenger of my family, the only way that I can fully redeem ultimately is there has to be a loss of life, someone else's life to redeem. So if Marie premeditatedly took the life of someone in my family, my responsibility is to take her life. It redeems the loss of life. Okay? If she is found to be guilty, she has to spend the rest of her life in the city of refuge. The blood is not redeemed until the high priest dies.
If I'm guilty of, or if I'm innocent of the premeditated, if it were an accident.
Yes, but there is still a loss of life.
Loss of life.
So the only way that it can be fully avenged is for the high priest to die, which is why it says in Scripture, the manslayer will stay in the city of refuge until the high priest dies. Because then that death redeems the other death. I'm going to give you a minute to draw a parallel.
My gears have been turning this whole time. Like there's two thoughts going on in my head, and one is formed, but the other one is still not there yet. One is that idea, there's that, I don't know if you would call it a theology, but that idea out there that a lot of the Old Testament, and not that this is all that's going on, let me say that. Part of what's going on in the Old Testament is there was a time that was quite barbaric, and if you stole from me, I could kill you. And so a piece of this is God teaching his people there is another way.
Yeah.
Death, murder, taking a life isn't the answer for everything. I don't know if this is true or not. This has just been something that's presented to me over the years, and it makes a lot of sense. But and so by the time we get to Leviticus, it's laid out very specifically how you handle the different crimes. But as we've said more than once, there was no expectation of a heart change back then. And eventually we get to that point. And the thought that is not quite formed there yet is there's definitely something else going on deeper below the surface that I can't articulate yet, that has to do with sin and redemption and cities of redemption. You know, there's something else there that is just not forming in my brain yet. I've got to finish this cup of coffee and have at least one more probably. So you'll just have to leave me with that until it really forms. But there's something else there that I can't.
Well, what's fascinating to me that seems to be presented in so many of the commentaries I read and so many of the other scriptures that I read was this idea that God is really trying to convey to his people, which we've talked about so many times, of how different you needed to be from everybody else. Death and killing and murder of any sort, sacrifice of animals and people and children and whatever were the Canaanite way, were other cultures' ways. And it wasn't supposed to be the Israelites' way. And yet, to some degree, God takes what they've seen around them and he shapes it with a new meaning. And part of what I think he says here in this whole thing is that I want you to see how valuable life is, that you have to be careful. Around you. You don't want to accidentally. And one of the examples in scripture, and I think it's in Deuteronomy, talks about, for example, if you are cutting wood and the iron part of your handle flies off of your axe and kills somebody else, it was an accident. Like, that's the example in scripture. Like,
one wonders how many accidental deaths happened around back then.
Well,
apparently a lot.
Apparently, the accident of your axe handle flying off while you're cutting wood happened enough that it's like a McDonald's rule of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, like
that sign is out in public now because somebody did that.
Right.
Isn't that, or is the grace of God there since the beginning?
Yeah.
I mean, that's. Yeah. We make jokes about the Old Testament versus the New, but the truth of the matter is the grace of God was there from the beginning, since before the beginning. Yeah. And here is yet another beautiful example of the grace of God. Yes, there has to be a life for a life. God can't be, there's those two ideas that go together. You've got sin, God can't be where there's sin. And then you've got the sanctity of life and how before Noah, you couldn't have meat, right? Like I'm remembering that. That was the point where God said it is okay to kill and eat. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. Drink another sip of coffee. That's the point at which God said it's okay to kill an animal for food, but only these animals. You have to drain its lifeblood first. Yeah. And so you're really starting to formulate that idea of a life for a life, and it's going to get expanded upon over and over and bigger until you get to Jesus.
But, okay, so I want you to think about what I just said about the Avenger of Blood is called the Kinsman Redeemer, who must come in to redeem the loss of life. One of the ways that loss of life is redeemed is by the death of the high priest.
Yeah.
Jesus is the kinsman redeemer.
Right.
Jesus is the high priest. And so I see this beautiful setting up even here of like God's giving a taste of what really is to come with Jesus, who will come and avenge the blood of humanity that was shed, which is really just avenge you for the sin in your life. And I mean, you know, to take you back and to redeem what has been lost for you. And the way he does it is that it's not really redeemed until his death.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. It reminds me of a really powerful little mini movie that I may have shown y'all at some point. But it's called True and Better, and basically the gist of the whole little mini-movie is saying, look, we've got these threads running through all of the Old Testament. Every single one of them is leading us to Jesus. And here is another example of that thread running through it all.
Yeah.
Jesus was not absent from the Old Testament. Jesus was
he was there.
The thread, that singular idea that God is preparing his people for thousands of years ahead of his actual coming.
Yeah.
You know, the flip side of that is as the kinsman redeemer, as the avenger of blood, he has every right to just wipe us out.
Well, we can jump all the way to the end of the book.
I mean, yeah.
And look and see that we are very comfortable with Jesus as the Lamb that he came as in the New Testament, in the Gospels.
Yeah.
But we're informed that when he comes back, he's not coming as a lamb, he's coming as a lion.
Well, he's coming as the Avenger of Blood.
He will be coming as the Avenger of Blood.
Yeah. Yes.
He came as kinsman redeemer. And he will come again, that same purpose.
Yep.
But now he's going to be avenging. I don't know. Maybe.
Tell me, Jesus
we may be jumping a little bit.
Because the Avenger of Blood the kinsman has every right and responsibility. Now, one of the things that a few people pointed out was that the most important aspect of the kinsman at this point is that they are not supposed to, they have a family obligation to redeem. They do not have the right to vengeance. This is not about vengeance. This is about redemption and restoration of the loss of life, the blood that's shed. So they make quite clear some of the people that I've read, and I think Scripture in places does this too, that that life should not be taken, the taking of life should not be taken lightly.
Right.
It should be taken very seriously, and you do not take it in vengeance. We don't ever take life in vengeance. We take life for the people of God at this point. We take life because it is the redemption and restoration of other life that was lost. There has to be something sacrificed for the redemption, which goes back to the Levitical system of sacrifice too. But especially if you had hate enough to choose to kill someone, the grace of the refuge city and the manslayer, if they're found to be innocent, is they get to live.
Yeah.
But they still took a life.
Yeah, there's still
so they can't return home until there is a loss of another life. So there's grace in continuing to have life if you've taken that life, because you didn't have hate in your heart. You didn't mean to. Yeah. But there's consequence too, which I believe is very true about life. There's consequence to the things that we do. There's premeditated of when we want to hurt somebody and say something mean or whatever else. And there's consequence when we accidentally do something that hurts someone.
Yeah.
There should be consequence because we care about the value of the image of God within other people. So
there's a lot more in chapter 20 than, it's what?
It's not long.
It's only 9 verses long.
It's not long.
But it is packed full. And really, the part that we talked about was only 1 through 6.
Well, really, the rest of it is just, this is where they are. Right. This is the cities. And the 3 cities on the east were appointed before they come into the promised land. Right. When they give those 2.5 tribes their land, they go ahead and give those 3 cities of refuge.
Yeah.
And then Moses gives those 3, and he says, okay, when you take the rest of the land, you settle it, then you determine the next 3. And one of them, interestingly, if you noticed, is Hebron.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now Hebron is so fascinating because it's Caleb's city. It's a Levite city. And it's a city of refuge.
Yeah.
So, and Hebron eventually becomes the first capital of King David.
Okay. Yeah.
Special city.
So it's kind of neat that it was, and isn't that what you said? It's the only land that Abraham owned.
Yes. It was the only land he ever owned. He bought it when Sarah died. He needed to bury Sarah. And he's buried there too. So is Isaac and Rebecca. And
so is it still modern day Hebron?
No, not Rebecca. Sorry.
That's a good question. I don't know. We'll have to.
Yeah, Isaac and Rebecca.
We'll have to go look.
Jacob
and see if it's. We'll have to look into that. I don't know.
I don't have a modern day times thing in my Bible.
Still modern day Hebron, but it's a pretty significant. There's lots going on in Hebron.
Yeah, Hebron.
Yeah. And Shechem, which is one of the other ones on the west, becomes it becomes pretty significant as well. So
it says it's
where the Ark
the Holy Land in modern times.
Yeah.
The West Bank,
in Hebron. Yep.
Right there.
So, and there is debate. Shechem, I think, the boundary line of Manasseh and Ephraim moves around a little bit.
It moves,
and so sometimes Shechem is Ephraim, sometimes Shechem seems to be the half Manasseh, but that's one of those lines that's kind of confusing.
Well, and it's I seem to remember that some of Ephraim's cities are in Manasseh, and some of Manasseh's cities are in Ephraim, and that's part of the idea is don't forget who you really are, and that is one tribe.
Yeah.
Right.
And not, you are many tribes, but you belong to one God. Don't forget your unity. And so the lines are meant to be kind of blurry. It's not supposed to be hard and fast. Because it's not theirs anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, so Shechem.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, any other questions? We talked a little bit about chapter 21, but I don't know if there's really so much. If you guys have any questions, maybe I can answer them for you. But
to me is really just kind of cut and dry. But I think it's one of these that, we can look at it as just, man, this is really boring. But if we go back to when I said last week about the like going down to the clerk of court to find your whatever, that when this stuff was written, it wasn't necessarily, okay, now this is chapter 21 and we're going to do all this. It was the little bits.
Yeah.
And so for the people that cared about, what we see as verse 6, for the people that cared about that, they wanted as much specificity as they could so that they knew exactly what was intended for them.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you read them one after the other, after the other, after the other, boy, does it sound repetitive.
Yeah.
But if you're skimming through this in some parchment pages or whatever, looking for the court documents,
Right.
Of, okay, I want to make sure that this city is what it is. Okay, yep, there it is, and the land and the livestock or pasture land or yep, there it is. Okay, good. Yep, this is what I have.
Yeah. Looking at it on this map, the tribes or the clans are color coded. The Levite clans. So the Kohathite clan is primarily in the south part on the west side of the bank.
Yes.
Except for a couple of outlining cities. And then Gershonites primarily up north, except for a couple of outliers on the east. And then the Merarite clans are primarily on the east side in Gad and Reuben with a couple of outliers. So they're like...
Yeah, so honestly, I think there's a little bit of a reason for that. And I had to go back and do a little bit of reading to kind of figure that out. In Numbers 3 and 4, it talks about the Levitical tribes, because I didn't know who those 3 tribes were. I just thought they were all Levites. And so I was real confused. Well, one of the things to know is that God tells Moses when they split the land for the Levites to give them their land, they're supposed to get... beyond the tribes that are bigger, which is Judah and Simeon, will have to split their land up more for Levites because they have a bigger portion. Yeah. Everyone else is supposed to give kind of an equal portion, but that doesn't necessarily happen because I think Naphtali only gives like one portion. And it's a little bigger or something like that. I think it's Naphtali that gives like one portion, but then there's there's a smaller place that gives like 3 portions. And so I don't necessarily know what happened, but a few of the commentaries talk about like they didn't quite do it the way that God said they were supposed to do it when they split
Manasseh could have given a lot more.
Yeah,
based on this map.
Right, but they didn't. But one of the other things that you made note of that the Kohathonites or whatever you say them.
Kohath.
Right. Those 3 clans had different responsibilities as Levites, and I didn't know that. So back in Numbers 3 and 4, it talks very specifically about these 3 clans. So the Kohathites are directly from Aaron.
That makes sense. They're down south.
Yeah, so Eleazar, who is the high priest right now helping determine with Joshua, is the son of Aaron. Now, Aaron had 4 sons. 2 died in Leviticus for doing the wrong thing. And Eleazar now is the high priest with Joshua because Aaron has passed on. So each clan had a responsibility in regard to the tabernacle. The Gershon clan were in charge of the materials of the tabernacle. If you read in Numbers 3 and 4, it clearly states that they're supposed to take care of the tent and all the coverings, all the materials of the tabernacle. Okay. They are in charge of making sure those things are, taken care of and kept up with and whatever. The Merari clan, they are the care of the tabernacle frame, the structure of the tabernacle, wood, pegs, ropes, all that kind of stuff. The Kohathites, which is Aaron's particular clan, is in care of the actual elements of the sanctuary. And so they take care of the ark, the table of the showbread, the lamp, all that kind of stuff that have to do inside. And particularly because if you notice in chapter 21, it splits up the clan of the Kohathites and kind of talks about them in 2 separate ways. It's because one portion of them, very specifically just Aaron's immediate family, so it would be Eleazar and any kids he has, they are the only ones that when you move the tabernacle can go in and touch the holy things when they pack them up, essentially. That's why they split them up and essentially kind of name that they have two separate. They name them separately in their space. But the reason that they're placed where they are is because they're actually somewhat closer to where the tabernacle ends up being.
Is it Shechem or Shiloh?
They're at Shiloh right now. Eventually they will move to Shechem, and it will stay at Shechem until the Philistines steal it.
Shechem is a Kohathite clan town and a city of refuge.
Yep.
How fascinating.
So really, I mean, like, there's a few other things we could talk about, but that, to me, that was kind of the most interesting and fascinating, because I had no idea that they had responsibilities, but it's very clearly outlined in Numbers chapter 3 and 4. So
that's very interesting. Like that delineation of responsibilities.
Yep.
You got your facilities crew, you've got your media crew,
right?
You've got your liturgical crew,
right? Everybody had their specific responsibilities for taking care of the sanctuary, the tabernacle. So
I like it. So where are we headed next week?
Oh yeah, so our Transjordanian crew is headed home. Our Eastern tribes.
That was a big word. Transjordanian crew.
All of the hoity-toity commentators use that word. They do. Get with it, Kyle, if you're going to be hoity-toity with
we should be hoity-toity and use words like Transjordanian.
They're headed home next week.
All right. Well, thanks for listening again, tuning in to another fascinating conversation that we're having. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, all those places, YouTube. Check us out at trinityrustin.org. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for listening.